Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you all for logging on to this afternoon's presentation. Here on the line, we have Mr. Franklin Jones, the Chief Marketing Officer from Spike Security, who's going to be talking about it's time to think differently about network security. Now, we've got a couple of minutes while we wait for the last few people to log on, so I'm just going to run through a bit of background on some of the things that Franklin's going to cover. Something is seriously wrong here. Businesses spend millions every year on the latest security technologies to keep their businesses safe, and yet they still get attacked. Why does this continue to happen over and over again, and what can we do about it? This presentation, loaded with compelling research data from many industry sources, provides revealing statistics on how bad this cybersecurity problem really is and why it has continued to get worse despite your best efforts. So, I guess after that very brief introduction, Franklin, it's over to you.
All right, thank you, Tom, and welcome everybody. I'm speaking to you live from beautiful California. Actually, it's raining here, but I hear the weather's equally undesirable in the UK. Anyway, the description of the webcast today is quite accurate. What I want to do is share with you a lot of research that I think you're going to find relevant, and it does put a spotlight on the fact that maybe it is, in fact, time to think differently about the way we're doing network security. So I want to start here by asking you to take on the perspective of a cyber criminal. Imagine yourself as a cyber criminal, and your goal is to get inside your network. And again, you spent probably hundreds of thousands, maybe more, annually to try to keep your network safe, to defend against these kind of attacks. But now you're a cyber criminal. You want to get inside that network. If you think about the various attack vectors that you could use, some of them are shown on the slide here, which one would provide the path of least resistance? In other words, the easiest way into the internal workings of your network. Well, there's lots of options, of course, but the research has indicated over and over again that there's one clear attack vector that is the path of least resistance, and that is the web browser. And that's what we're going to focus on here today, is if you can stop that one attack vector, you will have solved arguably the number one security problem facing most organizations today. In fact, we did research, and by the way, this presentation is going to be loaded with research, so I won't be sharing you anything in the way of opinions. This is all fact-based stuff. So here we go. We did research with two different organizations here in the U.S. this past year, the Ponemon Institute and the Enterprise Strategy Group, and we asked them to go out and talk to organizations across the U.S. And I'm sure, by the way, the same data likely applies to companies in the UK. But what they found out after talking to about 1,000 organizations across the U.S. in different sizes, different verticals, is that yes, indeed, 81% say web browsers are, in fact, the primary attack vector, with most of malware attacks coming through those browsers. Now, they also do a very good job of keeping those browsers secure, patched, up to date, but in the end, that doesn't completely solve the problem. Equally disturbing is that their traditional forms of security technologies that they use to protect themselves are becoming increasingly ineffective. And as a result, on average, in 2014, these organizations suffered about one attack per week, specifically from browser-borne malware. And this cost them about $3 million, which would be, almost £2 million annually to clean up. So it's a problem, and it's not getting any better. But, hold on here. That's the wrong button. There we go. Let's see if this advances okay. Seeing a little sluggish behavior in this. I'm pressing forward, but the slide's not forwarding, so I'm not sure what the problem here is. Well, this is interesting. The button on the right top doesn't seem to be working here.
Which slide are you going for, Franklin?
This would be, there we go. Oh, man, just jumped into 3 slides back, so, okay.
bear
Sorry
with us,
about
ladies and
this.
gents. We've got a bit of a technical problem.
Okay. There we go. Maybe it's the fact that I'm thousands of miles away from you guys. So anyway, hold on, let me go back to one more if I can. Wow. Okay. Okay, so sorry about that. Here we go. I think we're back on track here. So if you think about the data we just looked at with most attacks coming into the browser, here's how we traditionally defend against these attacks. Typically, you build up a nice multi-layer defensive web security architecture with all of the right products. These are great products: secure web gateways, network AV, IPS, content analysis engines, where you can detonate potentially malicious traffic, and of course, endpoint security. Now, all this stuff is good. It's very intelligent. Costs a lot of money, but in the end, somehow, malware is able to bypass all of this and reach your endpoint device. And why is that? Well, the answer is because all of these products, as smart as they are, rely on some form of detection-based technology. In other words, they look at the traffic and they ultimately have to make a decision. Yes, this is safe. No, it's not safe. Yes, I will block it. No, I will allow it. And it depends a lot on the individual technologies embedded in those products. But at some point, they're going to fail. And as a result of that, what we're seeing is a disturbing cybersecurity investment trend. So on the left here, according to Markets and Markets, they recently announced a report that showed that the global market investment annually for all cybersecurity stuff is about $105 billion US. So again, that's about 65 billion pounds annually, and that's going to increase almost 50% to $170 billion over the next 5 years. And typically, this investment has been focused on proactive security. In other words, trying to identify and block the bad stuff before it happens. But what we're seeing that's relatively disturbing is the pendulum is swinging the other way. And we've been noticing it here in the U.S. at several different cybersecurity conferences. I've talked to several Gartner analysts about this, and they've confirmed that, yes, indeed, we're seeing more investments moving toward the reactive side. In other words, kind of waving the white flag and saying, you know what, we're going to get hacked, so let's just spend more money to find and fix these breaches after they happen instead of trying to stop them. So that leads me to three hypotheses that I want to share with you in this presentation, and that is, and I'd like you to just have an open mind about this. One is all traditional means of detecting and blocking malware attacks will ultimately fail. And listed there are several different ways that detection technologies work, as basic as AV signatures that you find on an endpoint, which everybody now agrees are no longer effective, to more advanced techniques like machine learning and predictive analysis, which again are very intelligent, but at some point they will have their limits. So there's going to be that to deal with. Hypothesis number two is a quote from Albert Einstein, which says it's insanity to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. So what I'm suggesting here is the answer is not necessarily buy more stuff, more detection-based stuff. If it's not already working, it's probably not going to work in the future. So rethink that whole hypothesis about I'll just add more stuff and ultimately the problem will get fixed. And then that leads us to hypothesis number three. Maybe it's time to think differently about network security and look at a completely different way to solve this problem. And specifically what we're going to talk about here a little bit later is the role of isolation technology as a way to solve this number one attack vector. It's a technology you probably are not too familiar with, and we're going to go into it in a bit more detail. But Gartner has been having this on their radar, and they named it as one of the top 10 security technologies last year. So it is a way that can solve this problem. And in full disclosure, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we as a company have integrated this technology into our products. But before I get there, let's talk about this browser problem a bit more so you can understand how bad it really is. So browsers have become arguably the most important application on desktops today. If you think about everything you could possibly get rid of from your desktop, the browser is probably the last thing you want to get rid of because it keeps you connected to your customers, partners, suppliers. It helps you to be productive. But at the same time, it was never designed to be a security tool at all. And as a result, it is incredibly insecure and highly vulnerable to cyber attacks. And it ends up being, oddly enough, even though it's free, the most expensive application you have to secure. And you might argue that, well, that was before, but now browsers have become very secure. Well, not necessarily. So here's a story that came out of an event that happens in Canada every year called CanSec West, and there's a smaller sub-event there called Ponduon. And the idea here is that the white hat hackers, the good guys, are invited to come in and break through the latest, greatest versions of all major commercial browsers. So you have active participation from Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Explorer, bringing their latest, strongest, most secure browser into that event and saying to the white hat team, go ahead, try it. Just try to hack it. Well, the picture you're looking at here is a 19-year-old kid from South Korea who was able to break through Chrome in 2 minutes. Literally 2 minutes he broke through. After that, he knocked down Firefox, Safari, Explorer. He walked away with $220,000 in cash as a result of him being able to do that. So that's one 19-year-old kid who did all of that in less than a day, and he walked home or flew home with a lot of money in his pocket. So good for him. Unfortunately, bad for us because it just highlights the fact that browsers are not, in fact, safe at all. So those are the good guys, and as a result, there's bad guys taking advantage of this. There's a whole black market that was revealed last year through some work done by a blogger in Washington, D.C., Brian Krebs, who's kind of an investigative journalist, and he uncovered this black market that's probably worth $1 billion annually, and it's a malware as a service market where bad guys can go and buy and sell exploit kits to target these specific browsers. And that means that if your organization is running any one of these major browsers, they can acquire an exploit kit designed specifically to go after your browser in your organization, break through it, and get access to your endpoint. So it's not a good thing. And it's getting even worse because according to Symantec, they released a report not long ago, maybe 2-3 months ago, where they discovered 317 million new pieces of malware in 1 year, in 2014. So that equates to about 10 new pieces of malware every second. How are you going to keep up with that? And again, if you consider 80% of this stuff is coming through the browser, that means 8 new pieces of malware coming through your web browser or targeting your web browser every second. That has never been seen before. Also of interest here is that 28% of this malware is now virtual machine aware. And that's important because a lot of companies will buy these content analysis engines where you can sort of funnel off malicious traffic, detonate it, and see if it is in fact malicious. But now this malware is able to recognize if it's in one of those devices and go into stealth mode until the scanning is done, and then relaunch itself and continue the attack. So malware is becoming incredibly intelligent and more undetectable. And it's made even worse because these cyber criminals get a lot of cooperation from employees inside your network. And according to IBM, a report they released, human error accounts for 95% of all these breaches. And what that means is all any employee has to do is click on a link. That's it. So that's just click on a link, and the attack is started. And it's also worth noting that employees cannot be controlled. A lot of these employees joining the workforce today have grown up with the internet. They're incredibly smart about how to get around security controls. So if you try to issue policy saying you can't do that, it's just a challenge to them saying, oh yes, I can, because you can't control me, and then they'll find a way to get around whatever roadblocks you put up. So that's not going to necessarily solve the problem either. So as a result of all of this, I guess it's not surprising that, yes, the pendulum has swung the other way. The traditional efforts to identify and block this bad stuff are, again, increasingly ineffective, and as a result, companies are moving more and more toward a reactive approach. But there's a problem with that as well. So if you go back to those devices we looked at early on that you typically use to build your defense in depth architecture, there's some issues there too. So this is a report done by the Ponemon Institute a few months ago, where they looked at 630 organizations to find out about the alerts generated by all of those products and how many alerts are generated and what do you do with them. And what they found was an average of 423 per hour. Imagine that. Now, no organization has the time to follow up on 423 alerts per hour. In fact, they don't. What's interesting there is only 4% of the alerts were investigated. That means 96% of all the alerts generated were never even followed up on. Now, you might say, well, it might not have been good. There might have been false positives, But it results in wasted time, and who knows if they were good or bad alerts. They were never followed up on. So this is part of their due diligence process, is to look at this pile of alerts and figure out which ones are worthy and which ones are not. And they waste more than $1 million annually in wasted productivity or lack of productivity to deal with this never-ending stream of alerts. And then the second phase of being reactive is the discovery part. So when you finally go, aha, I found the problem. Now, according to a report from Mandiant, that discovery takes on average 205 days. That's 7 months. So this is important because some of you on the webcast today may think, well, that's these guys. I have not been attacked. But in fact, maybe you have, and you just haven't discovered it yet. Because here again, this is data from a lot of companies across the U.S. revealing that 7 months on average before you even figure it out. And in one case, 8 years, which is, I guess, a crazy outlier there. But equally disturbing, though, 70% of the time, they're informed by a third party. You're not even aware of it. It's another third party that typically informs you that you've been attacked. So a disturbing trend there around discovery. And then the third stage of being reactive is the recovery process. And according to Kaspersky Lab, a report they put out, there's a cost with that, of course. There's the professional services, the lost business opportunities, and the downtime. They totaled it at about $500,000. I think it's a lot more than that. But even at that level, that's a problem. You could certainly use that money and repurpose it in other ways to improve your organization. So those are the issues around being reactive as well. So it doesn't seem to be a good situation no matter how you look at this thing. So then let's go back and look at these three hypotheses. Malware detection technologies have reached their limit. Doing more of the same, not the answer, but either is being reactive. So then maybe it is time to think differently about these technologies and look at isolation technology as an alternative. So what is isolation technology, malware isolation? It is the physical and or virtual separation of all web content from direct interaction with any secure network application system or devices. So it truly does isolate content away from all the stuff that matters most to you. And the key difference here between isolation technology and basically everything else you have been using is that it does not try to detect anything, nothing. So when we talk to customers about isolation technology, they typically say, well, it sounds interesting, but how do you know if it's good or bad? And the answer is it doesn't matter. We assume everything is bad. That's what isolation does. And in this case, it puts all web content on its own physical or virtual island, completely isolated from the stuff that matters most to your organization. And that's the only safe path forward. Now, I mentioned Gartner has been an advocate of isolation technology, and what you're looking at here is what they call their adaptive security architecture. Not sure if you can see the details on this slide here, but at the 1 o'clock position, which they call the starting point in the process, they recommend the use of isolation. And then after that, continue on with other traditional means of protecting yourself. But Gartner believes that this is one of the key technologies, as I mentioned. It's certainly not going to solve every security problem you have, but it is an effective first step in that architectural development. So that leads us to our product, which I want to talk about, which is called ISLA, which is Spanish for island. And this is a web malware isolation system, and it's an appliance-based solution. And it is one that is intended to solve this particular problem. This number one attack vector of how do you stop web malware from coming in through web browsers and infecting your endpoint devices. That's what ISLA was built to do. So let's talk briefly about how this thing works. This is a similar slide to what I showed you before, but in this case we have the ISLA appliance deployed outside the firewall. And let's see if these, I guess there's this little slide build here. So in this case, the users inside the network are connected not directly to the internet, but instead they're connected to the ISLA appliance. So from their perspective inside the network, it would be business as usual. They would access the web or request web content as they normally would. But when they do, ISLA would launch an isolated VM on their behalf on the appliance. And then what ISLA would do would establish a secure connection out to the web and go ahead and fetch whatever content they wanted and then fully render that content inside the VM on the appliance outside the network. And then the magic in all of this is we've developed this patent-pending technology that then transforms all of that original web content, which is outside the network, completely transform it into a different format and delivers it to the users inside the network. And then if there's any malware associated with that original web content, it would stay outside the network and in the VMs outside the network. And then when the session is over, the VM is destroyed along with any malware. So the net result of all of this is that, if there's any web malware, again, it stays outside. There's no impact on users inside. So here's another view of what I just described with a little bit more detail so you can understand what's going on under the hood, under the bonnet, so to speak. So first of all, we have from the web HTML traffic coming into ISLA and, through an HTTP or HTTPS connection. But again, it's rendered on the appliance itself. We have a browser on the appliance that's based on Chromium technology. And then the magic here is we take the rendered content on the appliance and we basically split it up into 4 separate streams of data using a proprietary technology. So audio, video, text, and graphics are each transformed into their own separate stream of data, if you will. And then it's resynced using the air-gap transport technology, which is another patent-pending technology, and then resynced and delivered through a secure 256-bit AES encrypted path back to the endpoint. So now if you're malware on the appliance, you have no idea where to go from the appliance because you've never seen any sort of technology that splits up web content into 4 discrete streams of data and then resyncs them through a proprietary transport protocol and then encrypts them over 256-bit AES. So malware is completely unprepared for anything like this, and this is one of many reasons. We don't have time to go into all of the details, but this is one of the many reasons why malware is unable to ever reach the endpoint device inside your network. And by the way, this technology has been tested by 2 independent research firms, or testing labs, I should say, to validate this claim that, yes, in fact, it is 100% effective against preventing web malware from entering the network through the browser. So that's basically how it works underneath the hood. Equally important, we do support all major browser plugins on the appliance. So this is important because, as you probably know, browser plugins are also very vulnerable targets, very often exploited by cyber criminals for attacks, particularly Flash and Java, another path of least resistance for cyber criminals. So again, those are all out on the appliance and used, and they're there because some applications need them. So they're supported out on the appliance. Another hugely important benefit of this particular architecture is that it addresses the growing concern about how do you handle SSL traffic. Now, more and more websites are being encrypted using SSL, and it's doing so as a way to make those connections more secure, which makes total sense. However, again, never underestimate the brilliance of cyber criminals because they have figured out ways to use encrypted SSL connections to basically embed malware within those connections. And Very often, organizations will have policies that say, well, we're not going to decrypt SSL traffic because we want to respect user privacy, in which case those connections are allowed to go through uninspected, unencrypted, or undecrypted, I should say. But ISLA solves this problem because, again, all connections are terminated on the appliance. All content is transformed before it's delivered to the endpoint device. And this is important because Gartner has pointed out that by next year, more than 50% of all malware attacks will be encrypted using SSL. So this has now become a strategic imperative to decrypt and inspect SSL. And again, we're solving this problem without compromising user privacy or anything like that. So that's good news. Then there's the issue of documents. And, you look at documents on the web, and there's always the issue, well, what if the documents are infected? Well, what ISLA does is, again, transform all of the documents you look at on the web, PowerPoint, Excel, Word, whatever you happen to look at, and completely transform that content before sending it to the printer. And that's important because a lot of printers today inside corporate networks are actually highly intelligent devices on their own. And cyber criminals know that those are also attack vectors. So if they infect a intelligent printer, that printer can be used as a launching pad, if you will, for an internal attack on the network. So again, we solve that problem by transforming all content that is sent to the printer. Now, if users inside the network want to save those documents as well, besides printing them, they can save them to their endpoint device as a PDF, which again is also transformed. So again, this is another way that those potential malware attack vectors are being transformed and cleansed in order to prevent any impact on the endpoint inside the network. Then the question comes up about how do you access internal web applications? In other words, I don't have to go out to the internet. I just need to use our internal app.com for business, in which case we've created a bypass function that says in those cases, you create a whitelist and exception policy, and you can go directly to that without having to go through the ISLA appliance, because that would just be a man in the middle, so to speak, without any additional value. Moving on, we have clients. Okay, then the obvious question is, so how do end users access this web content? So there's a couple ways to do this, and we've made both available because different customers have different risk tolerance levels. So the more secure option is to use the ISLA viewer, which looks, feels, acts just like a web browser, has all the functionality you'd expect in a web browser, but it is designed specifically and only to work with the ISLA appliance. And what this means is if you have very tech-savvy users inside the organization and you have a high-security organization, there's no possibility that the end users can use the ISLA viewer and get around security controls and go directly to the web. Not possible with this particular client. And it supports all Windows, Macs, and Linux clients. So that is the most secure option. However, we also have customers say, we're a little bit more risk tolerant, so that's okay if that happens. We don't want it to happen, but we also would prefer not to have additional endpoint software. So in that case, we've made ISLA content transformation, made it possible for that to be integrated into existing browsers and endpoint devices, including tablets and smartphones. And this is being rolled out as we speak. The idea there is that from an end-user perspective and from an IT administration perspective, there's no change required to the endpoint devices. The downside is there is still the possibility, again, if you have very rebellious, tech-savvy employees who, for whatever reason, want to bypass this process and go directly to the web and do things that are maybe where you don't have quite as much visibility. There is that small risk, but it really depends on again, the risk tolerance of you as a customer. Let's see here. So bottom line, isolation technology benefits. So the key points here is, again, this doesn't solve every security problem, but research indicates that the number one attack vector is, in fact, content coming in through web browsers, malware specifically. So what this does is eliminates that 100% elimination of that, which again is probably 80% of the security challenges you face and a lot of the reasons you build up this familiar, defense and depth architecture. Side benefits of that, of course, is it significantly lowers unnecessary costs related to detection, forensics, remediation, reimaging of devices, analysis of alerts and all this other stuff. So there's no tuning, no need to set filters, just plug it in and it works. And just as important as it restores secure web freedom for your employees. So that is a very quick overview of isolation technology, and it maps back to the premise of this, which is it is time to think differently because the traditional approaches of trying to secure your network are no longer as effective as they were even 5 years ago. Okay, so with that, I think we have a few minutes here to take on some questions. And by the way, if we don't get to all of the questions today, one of the things I did want to offer you too is, let's see if I have my contact details in here. I don't. Okay, we covered that already. I don't think I did. So feel free to contact me directly at franklin@spikes.com. That's Franklin with a Y. I'd be happy to answer any emails directly that we don't cover here, but we do have a couple questions here. So let me just see this. I like the idea of removing human fallibility from the network. We all know it's the biggest vulnerability we face, that's for sure. By the way, there's more data I didn't show you on how big a problem that is. It's almost funny because it's so important to understand that employees cannot be controlled. Absolutely cannot be. So are there any controls you think this could replace, and do you still encourage user security awareness training alongside? So that's a good question. And the answer is, of course, this is not meant to completely replace all the normal policy training that you would normally do inside your organization. It's just to address the reality that it happens in every organization. So you're always going to have one or two rebellious people who say, yeah, that doesn't apply to me. I have my own rules. And you know what I mean. So this is not intended to say stop issuing policies, and it's more likely to address the issue of the people who are going to ultimately do what they want anyway. Let's see here. Some of these questions are not quite relevant to the discussion. Tom, do you have anything else that you wanted to share right now?
No, I think that's pretty much it from our side. Once again, just reiterating, if you would like to contact Franklin, then please do feel free to drop him an email. Obviously, this is going to be an on-demand webinar, so if you'd like to share it with any colleagues or friends, feel free to forward it on. For any of you based in London, we also have Franklin arriving in the flesh later on at the end of January, next Wednesday actually, for our physical RANT forum held in Cornhill in Bank in London. So if you'd be interested in coming along and thanking Franklin for stepping forward, then feel free to drop us an email.
One other thing, Tom. One other thing I forgot to mention there on the website at spikes.com. If any of you feel like this technology is interesting enough to you that you want to move forward and investigate further, of course, we can either set up a demo for you or work with you on a POC on premise if that makes sense to you as well. So there's various options, but also, feel free to take a look at the website because there's videos there. There's a lot of content that goes deeper into the stuff we've just covered here. But and again, feel free to contact me via email, and I'd be happy to address any other issues you might have.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for logging on today. I hope you found it as enjoyable as I have. Now, if you'd like to watch it again, feel free because it's going to be on demand. And I believe Franklin will be sending an email out to everyone who attended today with some information and some links to some of the stuff that he was talking about. So until next time, it's goodbye from me, and thank you for coming along.
Thank you, everybody.